today we're reading chapter 15, Canoe Expedition. Hello, welcome back. I'm Rosie Boom and I'm at Riverwood Cabin and reading to you from Where Lions Roar at Night, the fun and adventures of a pioneering New Zealand family. Written by me, Rosie Boom. And today we're reading chapter 15, Canoe Expedition. The mornings began to get crisp, and although the huge sky stretched above the barn like an endless blue sea, the wind was brisk. All the little liquid amber trees that Dad had planted down the drive were turning orange, red and gold. Millie thought they looked like a row of fires. The poplars had already shed some of their leaves, and their trunks glowed pale and slender in the early morning sun. The leaves on all the oaks were looking tired and old. Down by the river, the willows draped their long branches through the cold water, and the water gurgled over the stones and logs that lay in its path. Everywhere, the thick, long grass glowed a bright emerald green. Dad said he had more grass than he knew what to do with, but he didn't want to buy more stock because winter was just around the bend. Every morning before school and again in the afternoon, Millie, Sam and Jake jumped on their bikes and rode down their long drive to where a small apple orchard stood on Lee and Pam's land. Lee had said they could eat as many apples as they liked. For weeks they'd been watching and testing the apples, and finally they were ripe. Now they made the trip often and came back with their pockets stuffed with red, juicy apples. "Guess how many I've got?" Sam asked Mum one day with a cheeky smile. Mum looked at his cargo shorts and saw all the bulging pockets. 10? Sam's smile grew bigger. "No, 16. I could have fitted 20, but they kept falling out." "Good grief," laughed Mum. "Well, don't you eat them all, young man. Share them around. In fact, I'll have one now." The next day, Mum was outside watering her pot plants when she saw Millie biking back from the barn. Her hand flew to her mouth, but she didn't say a word. Millie raced up the drive towards her, with Jacob perched merrily on top of her shoulders. He was clutching a large red apple in one hand. They made a wobbly stop and dismount, and only then did Mum find her voice. "For goodness sake, Millie," she cried in a high voice. "What on earth were you thinking of? That is so dangerous." Millie shrugged her shoulders and flashed a slightly guilty grin. "Don't stress, Mum. He was fine. I wasn't going to crash." But Mum was not amused. "Don't you answer me back, Millie, and don't let me ever see you try such a stunt again." She brushed her hand across her eyes. "Oh, boy, when I saw you, I was too scared to say anything in case you got the wobbles." Millie and Jacob slunk away and stayed quiet for a while to let Mum recover. Later in the afternoon, the whole family went down into the orchard and picked large bucketfuls of apples. Kate lit the homewood, and Mum put her large preserving pan on top of the stove and prepared the sugar syrup. Then they sat around the table and began peeling the apples. All the children enjoyed helping with the preserving because Mum had a wonderful machine that peeled, cored and sliced an apple in just a few seconds. She called it her whirligig. The children had races to see who could peel an apple the fastest, and there were always competitions to see who had the longest unbroken peel. But the best part of all was eating some of the peeled, sliced coils of juicy apple before they could be put in the pot. All afternoon the barn was filled with the wonderful smell of cooked apple. At last, Mum wiped her hands on her apron and said, "We've got enough stewed apple to make apple pies for the whole year." Milly licked her lips. She loved apple pie. "We're going to have to get out all our woolies," Mum said one morning. "It's going to get pretty cold in the barn soon. In fact, I think I'll go shopping today for some thermal underwear for us all." Jake looked at Sam and made a face. Both the boys still wore shorts and t-shirts and bare feet. Sam had his belt on with all manner of tools, knives and swords attached. Mum said they looked like urchins with their ragged shorts, filthy legs and hair that desperately needed cutting. Milly knew she wasn't much better. She was dressed in shorts and a t-shirt, her blonde hair tied back under one of her many bandanas. She was ready for yet another day of organising her brothers and planning all sorts of adventures and action. "We don't need thermals," she said. "It's not even cold." "Well, you can buy me some," Dad told Mum. "It's definitely cold when I get out of bed." Milly smiled. Every morning, Dad woke them up with a jolly, "Good morning, family. Time to rise and shine." None of them were early birds like he was. But Josiah was the worst. Dad said that being a teenager was no excuse for sleeping in. Every morning, he knocked on his door and called, "Josiah, the Lord's fire." Then he would wait to hear the low grumble that came from the room. Everyone loved hearing Dad's cheery call in the morning. "I've decided I like winter," said Ellie. "Longer evenings and more time to relax and read books." "Me too," agreed Sam. "I like hot baths and hot water bottles." "Cooking by the wood stove," said Kate. Jake licked his lips. "Porridge." Said Dad. "What say we have porridge this morning?" Ellie raced into the kitchen and turned on the gas cooker. She loved porridge. Soon the barn was filled with the nutty smell. The children sat around the table and looked expectantly at Dad. It was time to do the test. Mum groaned. "Use one of my old plates," she said, but Dad wasn't listening. He had already filled a large bowl with porridge and was holding it in one of his big hands. Josiah began tapping a drum roll on the table. 7 pairs of eyes watched as Dad flipped the plateful of porridge in the air. It did one complete turn and landed safely back in Dad's hand, the right way up. The children all clapped and cheered. "It passed the test," said Dad solemnly. "Shall I do the double test?" "No," replied Mum. "One flip is just fine." "The double test," shouted all the children. Josiah began another drum roll and Dad paused for one dramatic moment. Then he threw the plate high in the air. It did a double flip and landed fair and square, the right way up, in his hand. Dad bowed. "Can we eat now?" laughed Mum. In all the years of porridge testing, she had only ever seen him lose one plate of porridge. All that day the children played down by the river. Kate helped the boys carry down the 3 canoes and paddles to the bridge. The river widened into a deep, still pool just past the bridge, but there was a shallow, rocky edge near the bank. After a lot of slipping and sliding down the muddy bank, they finally managed to launch the canoes into Cauldron Pool. "You take Jake with you, Kate," said Milly. "I'll use the little canoe, and Sam can go with Ellie in the big one." She carefully put one foot into the canoe. It rocked and rolled. The little canoe was difficult to get into without capsizing, but once she was in, it was usually fine. She held onto a branch above her head and started to climb in. The canoe shot away down the river without her. "Bring it back!" Milly yelled to Kate. This time, Kate held the canoe steady while Milly climbed in. "Right," she said, as soon as the canoe stopped rocking. "Let's start the expedition." The 3 canoes slid quietly through the water, apart from the gentle slap of the paddles. Bright dragonflies darted across the surface, and their wings glittered in the sunshine. The river area looked quite different once you were down on it and looking up. The huge trees on the banks towered above the explorers, and sunlight filtered through the branches and lit upon parts of the water in golden beams. A tui sat high in the branches of a totara tree, warbling and singing to the world. Milly thought it sounded like a fairy ringing some silver bells. Every now and then, a flock of rosellas dashed between the trees, chattering furiously. "Stop paddling for a moment and close your eyes," said Kate. They lay back in the canoes, closed their eyes and listened. Milly felt the warmth of the sun on her eyelids and listened to the gentle gurgling of the water as it tumbled over a log. She could just make out the quiet munching of the dairy cows that grazed in the field across the river. There was the faint hum of insects. Everything seemed so quiet and peaceful. She felt as if she could lie there forever. Mum called it listening to the silence. No wonder she came down here often to escape the noise and bustle of the barn. After a while, they set off again and navigated their canoes under the low log at Beaver's Bank. Milly had to lie flat down in her canoe to get underneath it, and that set up a bad case of the wobbles. Katie was ahead, laughing heartily as Jake tried to steady their vessel. Ellie and Sam brought up the rear. When Milly glanced back, she saw Sam looking nervously at the dark, deep water that lay still and quiet in the bend of the river. They had to get out in a few shallow places and carry their canoes. Finally, they reached Lantern Waste, where a submerged log lay most of the way across the river and created some small rapids. Mum had named them the Fords of Baruna. "Shoot them fast and straight," warned Kate, "or else you'll end up sideways and have to get out. I'll go first." Milly and Ellie held onto some roots in the bank to hold their canoes still while they watched Kate paddle towards the rapids. Jake crouched in the front like a mascot. The current caught them and they sped towards the gap. "Yahoo!" yelled Kate as she pushed with her paddle against the bank and forced the canoe into the gap. They shot over the tiny waterfall and glided safely out into the deep, quiet water that lay beyond. Jake shot his fist into the air and with a triumphant yell. Ellie and Sam went next. Milly could hear Ellie giggling before they even hit the rapids. Their canoe tipped dangerously over towards the water on one side, but then righted itself and shot through the gap. Ellie swung it around and gave the thumbs up to Milly. Milly let go of the root and pushed herself off from the bank. The canoe wobbled crazily, and she thought for one horrible moment she wouldn't even make it into the current. She paddled hard and soon felt the canoe pick up speed and race towards the rapids. "Paddle on the other side," shouted Kate. "You're going to miss the gap." Milly tried to swing her paddle over, but it caught on a bush, and by the time she'd got it free, the current had pushed her sideways into the gap. She jiggled her weight around in the canoe and tried to reposition it, but it was no use. The river was flowing against her canoe too strongly. She would have to get out. It wasn't easy trying to walk on the slippery stones while attempting to heave the canoe over the log. She looked grumpily at the others, who sat grinning in their canoes, watching her struggle. She grabbed hold of a branch and climbed into the canoe and quickly sat down. Water sloshed in behind her. Milly clutched the sides and tried desperately to get her balance. The canoe wobbled and the paddle fell out and began floating down the river. "Get it!" screeched Milly to the others. "Don't just—" But at that moment, the canoe capsized and dumped her unceremoniously into the cold water. She came up, spluttering with rage. "That stupid canoe!" she stormed, glaring at the others. "How come I had to have that dumb one?" The children sat in their canoes and tried to stop laughing. Milly could look awfully fearsome when she was angry. "Don't worry, Chook," called Kate. "It's all part of the adventure." Milly shot her a bitter look. "Just because it's not you, next time you can have the stupid little canoe." Ellie and Kate climbed out and helped their fuming sister bail all the water out of her canoe. Then they held it steady while she climbed in. She snatched the paddle up and set off without a word. "Don't worry, Milly," called Ellie after her. "You can have the first hot bath when we finish the expedition." By the time she'd soaked in a hot bath and had a good meal, Milly had recovered her sense of humour. She even laughed a bit at herself when the others told Dad and Mum all about it. As soon as the table was cleared, Mum brought out 2 large shopping bags and pulled out pair after pair of thermal leggings, then singlet after singlet. "We've all got 2 pairs each," she explained, and began distributing them around. "I'm not wearing these," wailed Jacob. "I look weird." He held up his green pair of leggings. They dangled in the air like 2 long bits of seaweed. "Go on," laughed Mum. "Try them on." Ellie, Milly and Sam had already run up into the loft and were preparing to model their new underwear. Jake sat on the sofa beside Mum and watched them come down the stairs one by one, twirling and flouncing about. He giggled at Sam in his white and blue striped thermals. "Go on, Jake," said Dad. "Model yours." Finally, Jake went upstairs and pulled on his leggings. They didn't want to go on, and he ended up with a bunch of legging down by his feet and the top of them stretched out thin and long. He tried again. After a bit of a fight, he got them on. Then he pulled on the tight-fitting green top. "Hurry up, Jake," called Milly impatiently. He hid behind the curtains. "Do I have to come up and get you?" she threatened. "Leave him alone," said Mum. "He doesn't have to model them if he doesn't want to." Jake unwrapped himself from the curtain and started to come down the stairs. "Finally," said Milly, and then she let out a loud guffaw. Jake's skinny little legs looked 10 times skinnier and longer than usual. He looked like a small green frog. "You belong down at the river!" exclaimed Milly. Everyone had burst out laughing except for Mum, who was trying hard not to. But when Jake began jitterbugging around in one of his funny dances, she gave up. "Look at those legs!" she spluttered. "Have you ever seen anything like it? Come here, little flippity gibbet, and give your mummy a cuddle." Jacob leaped into her open arms and curled up like a little frog. He loved being the centre of attention, even if it did mean wearing ridiculous green thermal underwear.